Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question built off of a comment. Sidney Powell had mentioned some conflicts of interest with Dominion and these systems. She had said, her words were, governors and secretaries of states and other politicians have a vested interest in this system. I read from last year an article where Nancy Pelosi's former chief of staff sat on the board of a lobbying firm that represents Dominion. If what you're telling us is true, and there is some kind of interest by certain politicians to invest in this kind of a system, and I find it ironic that today is Cyber Monday and we're talking about this type of issue. Have you looked at that, of any kind of a nefarious background when you're looking at these weighted votes? Do you have any indication or any suspicion, or is this just a mistake or a fluke in data? Does this lend to her claim that there might be some nefarious motives behind the system?
It's a very, very good question you bring up. Let me give you from my own actual experience in this. I ran for U.S. Senate in the Republican primary in Massachusetts, and I was deeply shocked when I found out that this weighted race feature existed. And pursuant to that, we issued FOIAs to actually get access to some very important data, which helps us connect to validate whether the weighted race feature was on. And that is called the ballot images, the cast vote records, and it's called the list vote records. Now, what are those things? When you put a ballot into a machine, a paper ballot, and that machine is scanned, that machine creates what's called an image, a photograph. And when tabulation takes place, guess what's tabulated? Not the paper. In the electronic voting machines, the actual images. Does that make sense? So the images are tabulated. So when you get a result, if you want to validate the integrity of that result, the output, we must have access to the ballot images, and because the ballot images are used to generate the cast vote records and the list vote records, which are the actual counts of votes that were gotten. So when, in Massachusetts, for example, I applied for a FOIA to get this, the secretaries of state of Massachusetts, and I believe this may be true in many secretaries of state across the country, they responded back to me saying they deleted the ballot images. In fact, they destroy them, that they don't have to save them by state law. And it is my understanding, pursuant to USC 20701 and 20702, for federal elections, those ballot images must be saved in order to validate the integrity of the election. Well, in my case, when I started sharing this on Twitter on September 25th, the Secretary of State of Massachusetts contacted Twitter and shut me down for 21 days left in my election. And what came out in testimony in Massachusetts with a federal judge here was that the Secretary of State of Massachusetts has a special partnership with Twitter, where they were able to brand what I was sharing, that ballot images were destroyed, as election misinformation. And in addition, they called the National Association of State Election Directors, NASED, which is the association of all the state election directors, and they too got involved in contacting Twitter to shut down my tweets where I was exposing that ballot images which were destroyed, which would be the evidence showing that the weighted race feature was on. It was quite extraordinary. Well, the NASED is the group of all state election directors. So why was my tweet, when Twitter had not shut me off when I was talking about election fraud, but the state of Massachusetts Secretary of State and the state election directors found it threatening, because what I was essentially stating was that the state election directors of a number of these states are concealing the actual evidence which directly correlates which can expose whether weighted race feature was on. So yes, I do believe it's nefarious. And if you go look at the National Association of State Election Directors, which is a nonprofit, they are funded, and they're an entity of Democracy Works. Democracy Works is funded by Rockefeller Brothers. It is also funded by the Murdochs, Catherine Murdoch. And you can look at who is actually controlling the state election directors, or what community are they part of. Now, why is this important? Because the state election directors and the secretaries of state are the ones who certify electronic voting systems. Which means, are they certifying electronic voting systems knowingly with the weighted race feature? And in my view, I know in Massachusetts that's what was done. And knowingly telling the vendors to delete ballot images, which are the evidence that interconnect the weighted race features being on and the ballot images. So in Massachusetts, the factory settings of these electronic voting machines, the default factory setting is to save all ballot images. What we discovered in Massachusetts is they tell the vendors to set that to off, which means delete, destroy all ballot images. And I believe that many of these secretaries of state are involved in this. So yes, I believe it is nefarious.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, I believe, and I was told recently that in Maricopa County with the machines in the Dominion, that in the RFP request for the procurement, that it says you are able to, this allows you to publish the images, and that we were requesting that those be published, and we have been denied that. So I'm in communication with the Board of Supervisors to see, is it possible to go ahead and put that up? So I would recommend the public also get involved in demanding to be able to see those, because, apparently we have leaders in the state elbow bumping today in celebration of the certification of this election. And clearly what you're saying, we should be doing anything but. It's abhorrent. It's a shameful thing. That's a sad day in Arizona that we're celebrating the certification of this election.
Mr. Julie.